The following is a presentation of the Chicago Bears Network and ChicagoBears.com. Download the Chicago Bears official mobile app for up-to-the-minute Bears content every day. And now, welcome to Bears All Access, your all-access pass into Chicago Bears football. Bears All Access is brought to you by IGS Energy and sponsored by Athletico Physical Therapy and CDW.
Pleasant good evening, everybody, and welcome to Bears All Access here on Chicago Sports Radio 670 The Score. I'm Jeff Joniak, along with broadcast partner from Bears Radio, News Radio 780 and 105.9 FM WBBM, Mr. Tom Thayer. Tom, the clock is ticking. Draft's just 22 days away. You getting ready?
Oh, I can't wait. I think this has been an amazing offseason, Jeff, because of the way the season concluded last year, all the changes for this upcoming season, all of the attention that's being paid by one position. I mean, if it wasn't for Pitts, that tight end out of Florida, we may not be talking about anybody else but quarterbacks. And frankly, no offense to our next guest, Jim Miller, I am a little tired of it. I want to see who else are we talking about in this draft. I mean, you know, not every team is going to pick a quarterback in the first round.
Well, listen, there's going to be a ton of conversation about tackles, my friend. Because I think that's an area the Bears will likely focus on at some point early in the draft, whether it be first round or second round. And so I think you'll get your fill of tackle talk. And just for you, Tom, we're going to give you a little present tonight. We are going to talk tackles in our next segment exclusively, okay? So hopefully you've done a little homework. And I know my man, Jim Miller from SiriusXM NFL Radio has been doing his homework. Jim, how you doing? Welcome in once again, our special guest here tonight. You got your tackle readiness. We're going to do quarterbacks too, but I mean, are you ready to talk a little tackle?
Yeah, I think, hey, we're going to give Tom, we're going to create a buffet here where he can just pick any tackle that he wants. They come in all shapes and sizes, so he'll be plenty fed because there are a lot of tackles that I think a lot of people are underrating in this upcoming draft.
You know what we have to do right off the top here, though? We talk about a lot of people in the building at Hallis Hall. And one guy is so beloved in that building that we got to wish a happy 90th birthday to the one and only, the legend, Clyde Emmerich. I know, Tom, he's one of your closest friends, and good to see he's in great health and ready to return to the building once the green light is given for everybody. And a man who just loves what he does, and he's always around that weight room, and he's made a big difference in so many players' lives over the course of his career. The first strength and conditioning coach in NFL history. And Tom, if you could put into some words, I know Brad Biggs did a tremendous job in the Tribune on an article for his 90th birthday, and you were heavily quoted in that article, but just in a real meaningful way, explain what he means to you.
You know, he's a guy in that building, no matter if you're a player, or if you're a broadcaster, or if you're an ex-has-been, you never avoid eye contact from Clyde Emmerich, because he's a guy throughout your career, whether you're a first round draft choice or a seventh round draft choice, he pays equal attention to you. He cares as much about your career, no matter where you were drafted or if you're a free agent. He's the type of guy that wants you to improve yourself, not only for right now, but he wants to improve yourself for the future. And so, you know, there's so many sayings that I'm reminded of when I think of Clyde Emmerich, and they're all meaningful, and he's had a tremendous impact on hundreds of players' lives, on hundreds of people' lives inside that facility. Because, like I said, he is a constant encourager. And you know, Jeff, if you have a bad broadcast, you don't want to look Matt Nagy in the eye. If you have a bad game, you don't want to look your position coach in the eye. You never shy away from eye contact with Clyde Emmerich because it's always going to be a positive reflection.
Well, you know, one of the quotes, Jim Miller, is that Tom always tells me, and Clyde's told me too, you can't shoot a cannon from a canoe. So maybe he told you that once or twice in the weight room. What were your experiences with him back when you played with the Bears?
Yeah, I agree with Tom. He was always positive. And one, you knew from Clyde, because he's been with the Chicago Bears for so long, he's seen everything. He's seen the ups and downs of seasons. He's seen the hot streaks, the losing streaks, how you work yourself out of a hole when maybe things aren't going so well, the adjustments you got to make. I think he was always he could always answer all your questions. Hey, Clyde, I'm looking to do this in the weight room to improve a certain area. And if he'd have just great suggestions and really knowledge that he was just going to bless and bestow upon you to be better. And I think, like we all say, he's a great teammate. I think for Clyde, he really touched every player, every person in the building, at least through my experiences, always in a positive way that Tom had mentioned. So he's a great role model for everybody to look up to, and certainly with not only his off-the-field exploits and what he's done in weightlifting and all that, but really was a benefit to everybody inside the entire building at Hallis Hall.
Jim, what kind of weightlifting did you do as a quarterback?
I was pretty aggressive in there. I at least I believe I was, and Clyde was always there to give me some tips. Whether it's I didn't go in there to squat as much as I could or bench as much as I could, but certainly wanted to be able to take the pounding and have the pliability for the position of quarterback. And I think Clyde was very helpful for me in that from that standpoint, and actually got me into the pool work and getting more a pool for cardio and things like that, and more dumbbell work that definitely strengthened my shoulder for areas of concern that I had concerning my shoulder.
Tom, if you didn't love the weight room as a player, could Clyde bring that love of weight training to you if you're one of those guys?
Yeah, of course. And that's what I'm saying. He had such a strong attachment to no matter where you were drafted, what type of strength you came to the Bears with, you were always going to leave stronger. But it is always something he instilled an attitude in you that weightlifting is going to be an important part of your life after the afterlife of football. He always used to say, you got to think about the big picture. And that was the entirety of your life. Do what you can do to become a better, more durable football player during your time in the Bears weight room. But when you leave the Bears, when people see you, let them know that you are an ex-football player. Allow them to see what you have learned in the weight room at the Bears facility and carry it to that afterlife. And through every one of my nieces and nephews, we've talked about weightlifting. In every bit of instructions I've ever given another person, it's the instructions that I've learned from Clyde Emmerich. And it still is as important today as it was 30 years ago. And it will be that important 30 years from now.
No, it's interesting too, because at age 90, he's still lifting weights.
Right.
We should all be so lucky.
And what does he always tell Jeff Joniak? Look, you're not a good student. I'd have a tough time with you.
No, he says, well, no, I'm not coachable. That's what
yes. There you go.
Not coachable. Him and Dave Hendrickson from the Bears football video operations always ask me, Jim. He always asks, "Are you coachable today?" And some days yes, and some days no.
Yeah, well, I can see that from both you and Dave. You guys kind of go to the beat of a different drum, and so I'm sure Clyde. In terms of all his discipline and his Olympic training, I'm sure that wouldn't have floated too well with his weightlifting team that he was a part of.
Hey, there's still hope for me. That's for sure. All right. As we look at what's going on this week, I guess, we take a broad view of things here in our first segment, but the Sam Darnold trade and what that means to the top of the draft, Jim Miller.
Well, I would say this. I think when you look at Carolina to make that move to trade for Sam Darnold, it tells you where they feel about where the quarterbacks are in this draft. Because if we feel that Trevor Lawrence is going 1, obviously the Jets feel good about a quarterback at number 2, and that's kind of resetting their football team. And then, of course, San Francisco trading up to number 3. It tells you that they're taking a quarterback. Now Carolina's sitting at the 8 spot. They feel that they can't move with anybody to get to number 4, potentially. Atlanta's at number 4. That would be a trade in division. And it tells you that they probably grade Sam Darnold higher than what their 4th and 5th quarterbacks are. So I think it was very telling what Carolina did.
That's Jim Miller. I'm Jeff Joniak, along with Tom Thayer. This is Bears All Access, brought to you by IGS Energy. Our first break ahead here on Chicago Sports Radio, 670 The Score. Welcome back to Bears All Access, brought to you by IGS Energy. Choose clean energy for your home at IGS.com, because every good choice adds up to a better world. Jeff Joniak along with Tom Thayer and Big Jim Miller from SiriusXM NFL Radio, moving the chains with his partner there. You guys do mock drafts every week. Who do you have the Bears selecting in round 1 at number 20 should they stay there?
Well, if he keeps on going up the draft boards, and I do think he is, I had him taking the South Carolina cornerback, J.C. Horn. But, man, his numbers were terrific on his pro day. He's got the NFL bloodlines with his father, who's former New Orleans Saint wide receiver, Joe Horn. And I guess all his interviews have just been through the roof. So I think the way the corners are going right now, probably it could be J.C. Horn 1, Patrick Surtain out of Alabama 2, Caleb Farley out of Virginia Tech. You don't know about him because he's got a medical. He had a discectomy surgery with his back. Supposedly he's 100%, but teams are going to have to get all the medical on him. And so a player like him could be dropping a little bit. But, man, boy, that J.C. Horn sure looks like a surefire hot draft pick that's going to be a no, for him. There's not any really bad marks on him at all. So he's a pure football player.
All right, and a self-proclaimed maybe not self-proclaimed, but known around the SEC as a pretty good trash talker.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. He can do it. He learned from the best, his father. We got a lot of father-son duels that are going to be coming in this draft. I just talked to Lorenzo Neal, remember the fullback for Baltimore for so many years. His son's a defensive tackle at Purdue, but you're going to see a lot of sons whose fathers are former NFL players, so a lot of bloodlines in this draft.
Tom, are you okay with the Bears going with a corner in round 1 if necessary?
I am. The two offensive edges. I'm looking at offensive tackle and cornerback. I think cornerback is an important role. But, I'm interested to see, where is Trey Roberson? What is Artie Burns going to contribute? Because when we had small snippets to see these guys last year, they looked like they belonged in an NFL uniform. And they have true fun. So if they, get an evaluation through, the weight room and through some on-field work that these guys can come in here and compete, I think both positions are desperate for starting caliber players and depth. And so when you look at the 8 or 10 offensive tackles that are available to you, and Jim mentions the top 2 guys are not going to fall to the Bears at 20. But if they identify another corner out there that Ryan and Matt think as an immediate contributor, I wouldn't shy away from that position as well as offensive tackle.
All right, let's start breaking down some of these tackles. We'll start with Jim because Penei Sewell out of Oregon appears to be the top dog with maybe some strong consideration from the local crowd here, and Rashawn Slater of Northwestern, a lot of love for him as well. Maybe different players, a little bit Sewell, a little bit thicker, a little bit heavier, but by all accounts, just an animal there at tackle.
Yeah, he looks to be the real deal. Penei Sewell, and I talked to Paul Alexander, he's a former NFL offensive line coach for 30 years. He actually has worked with Penei Sewell out of Oregon. Basically 6'4" or almost 6'5". Let's just put it there, 331 pounds, did his 40 in just over 5 flat. 33 and a quarter inch arms, so you got plenty of arm length there. 10 3/8 hands, so he passes that drill as well. So, but he knocked his pro day everything out of the park. He showed his acceleration, his punch. He's got a vicious punch that Tom can talk about. But he's just a big, powerful, quick man. Has high production grades from his standpoint. He's smart on the video, and he's advanced technically with the really strong punch that I mentioned. He looks like a sure. Just a sure draft pick, probably the top tackle in this draft. Then you'd have to talk about Slater. One guy we're going to get into is Christian Darrisaw, because he is really flying up the draft boards, and we'll see where he falls. Maybe it's a person the Bears, if they do think about tackle and what Tom's talked about, maybe they could trade up a couple spots, land a good tackle in Christian Darrisaw, who also looks like a can't-miss prospect.
One thing about Sewell is, if you're going to have those heavy hands, they talk about that big punch, you have to have the feet that match up with it. Because one of the things that can really destroy your confidence, if you go for that punch and you miss and you don't have the feet to recover, that's going to get you in a lot of trouble at the NFL level. Maybe in college you can recover a little bit, but when they talk about the best for a gap scheme, the best for a zone scheme, Sewell has got the ability and the tangibles that you need for every one of them. So that's what I'm always concerned about is how does your feet recover from a miss with the hands? And that's the one thing I like most about him at this level is his tenaciousness and his ability for his feet to keep up.
Is it more challenging for us from the outside looking in to find the type of tackle that would best suit whatever the Bears' offensive scheme ultimately is going to be, because it's clearly been tweaked. It's been adjusted. The collaboration of everybody involved with those offensive coaches, they're coming up with their new plan here for 2021 to have the Bears offense, whatever that might look like. Does it make it a little hard to find guys that could potentially plug and play? Certainly at right tackle is one of the key spots.
Yeah, well,
go ahead, Tom.
Go ahead, Jim. Oh, well, no, I think there are a couple guys that are plug and play candidates here. And you look at their coaching background from college. What was their coach's influence on their career? If you look at Pat Fitzgerald and you look at what he means to the Northwestern program, and then you go and you look at Slater, you look at his ability to move, the way how bendable he is out of his stance, how intelligent he is at a really fast-paced system if they want to go at that high octane out there at Northwestern. I really like everything that he's been able to develop over the last couple of years. He's gotten bigger and stronger each year, but I do think, you know, the influence, because we see Pat Fitzgerald more than maybe we see the position coach of Oregon or the head coach of Oregon. So I like the influences that the coaches have put into the minds of these guys as their time in development.
Yeah, I think there's, every guy is going to fit a scheme differently because, you look at Mayfield, who's strictly a right tackle out of University of Michigan, they're going to run a little bit more power football from that standpoint. You got big centers, guards like a Creed Humphrey, who he's more of a gap system center and things like that. Slater, I agree with Tom, is probably the more athletic type that if you're in a wide open offense, that truly really does a lot of RPOs and things like that, I think Slater is going to have a perfect fit in the NFL, and we see more teams that are doing that. Other guys that I'm going to bring up, like Christian Darrisaw from Virginia Tech. This guy is probably a can't-miss prospect. That's what everybody thinks about him. So I wouldn't be shocked if he goes ahead of Slater. But he's 6'6", 302 out of Virginia Tech. He ran a 4.85 40-yard dash for that size. So this is a big athletic guy who can move. Had a ridiculous pro day that I mentioned. He had a 10'4" broad jump. He's got 33-inch arms. So he's just got a great frame. NFL tackle, just looks like the prototypical tackle. Very productive player. His athleticism's off the charts, and he only had 6 pressures and no sacks in 20 games that he performed in. So excellent speed and jumping skills as well. So he's got the body and athleticism, all the things that Tom is talking about in terms of the left tackle position. And there's plenty of other guys like him in this draft that probably won't be taken till round 2.
Well, one thing about this, Jeff, is because you and I had talked about it a lot, is that if we're going to identify an offensive tackle, that's what I want identified. I don't want a tweener. I don't want a gap guy. I don't want a guy that's saying, wow, if he fails at tackle, he can play guard. The Bears have enough centers and guards. And so just give me an offensive tackle. That's what I'm evaluating, pure and simple.
All right. It's as important a position as any in the National Football League, and it's worthy of another segment. We're going to pick up the tackle talk with Jim and Tom after this on Chicago Sports Radio 670 The Score. The Chicago Bears Network presents Inside the Bears, brought to you by Verizon. Anthony Adams and Lauren Screeden cover the world of Bears football on and off the field every Sunday night at 10:35 p.m. on Fox 32 Chicago, or watch anytime at chicagobears.com or on the Bears official app. Welcome back to the program with our producer, Jordan Tredup. Dan Barilli, appreciate you joining us tonight with Jim Miller and Tom Thayer. I'm Jeff Joniak as we break down the tackle position. There's so many apparently available in the upper rounds of this year's draft. Jim, and you were amplifying, or about to anyway, about something Tom said about wanting, if you tackle, you get a tackle. A guy who's played his entire career tackle, not a guy that maybe will, project as a tackle after being a really good guard, or vice versa. And I'm in line with that as well. How do you feel about it?
Yeah, well, again, I think, depending on what you're asking them to do, I do think this is a really good tackle draft that we mentioned. Guys who are wide open and guys who are more in the power mode. So as we know, they all come in different shapes and sizes, but legitimately, just prototypical, you want your left tackle to typically be probably about 6'5" and above. You know, that's really the starting point. They've got to have long arms, got to have quick feet that Tom mentioned, got to have the punch. You know, you want them to be the quote unquote Walter Jones, the dancing bear that has that type of athleticism. And there are guys in this draft that really check all those boxes. I think Sam Cosmi of Texas, he checks that box, 6'6", 314 pounds. He's got 34-inch arms, 4.87 in his 40. So here's a guy close to 320 who's running close to a 4.8 in terms of his 40. 36 on his bench press. So this is a strong, big left tackle. Other guys that are going to be talked about, Tevin Jenkins from Oklahoma State, very similar from that standpoint, and Sam Cosmi. Probably the best athlete overall in this draft at left tackle is Spencer Brown out of Northern Iowa. And look about his numbers. This guy's over 6'8", so he's almost like Big Cam Williams. So, you know, he's almost a 6'9" guy, 4'8" in his 40. That's almost 6'9". 6'9", 3-cone drill. That's ridiculous for a big guy to have the change of direction that he has. 4'3" in terms of his short shuttle, 9'9" in terms of his broad jump, 29 in terms of his bench press. How about this for Spencer Brown? No football player. Boy, he had no football in 2020. He had a baseball, basketball, really good athlete from his standpoint growing up in terms of all of his numbers. But he's tall, long, athletic. Like I said, missed 2020 because it was canceled, but he's been working the whole time. Last tidbit I'll tell you about how great of an athlete Spencer Brown is out of Northern Iowa. Out of all the tackles that have come out since 1987, now, that's over 1,134 tackles, he rated number one. Number one is what he rates in terms of the athletic ability. That's it's called the relative athletic score, RAS, R-A-S. He comes out number one since 1987.
Wow. That's a mouthful right there. And I was going to bring him up as you know, and maybe a guy like this can sneak into the top 3 rounds of the draft coming out of Northern Iowa. But, you know, you even neglected some of the big numbers, 34-inch arms, 82 3/8 wingspan, massive hands. But Tommy, all that being said, this is a guy who played defensive line in 8-man prep football and then moved to offensive line for the first time in his life at UNI. So is this a guy that you can mold and shape, or, you know, he clearly has the feet, he clearly has the athleticism, but needs work on technique, you would think?
Well, when I see Brown, I think he's one of the best big man athletes I've ever seen. And you think of the way he can run, you think of his skills, you think of his athleticism. But, you know, Jeff, I've had an NFL GM tell me he doesn't like tackles this tall because he doesn't believe they can win and gain and earn the leverage game throughout an entire contest. So now if he plays at a 6'9" frame late in the game against a good pass rusher, the difficulty of getting his punch in the right position, not illegal hands to the face, making sure he can stay in that athletic position is really challengeable. So when you said, yeah, this guy used to be a defensive lineman, hey, here's a guy that I may think about putting back at defensive tackle. I know it sounds, hey, listen, they've taken defensive tackles and moved them to offensive line. I love this guy, but I would like to see a simulated game where he's running and see what his bendability is in the latter part of the game and in an exhausting 2-minute drill. In those types of evaluations that you have to evaluate him by, because it's not only watching a guy run a 40 or going through the bench press. It's about how do you play with that frame when you're super fatigued.
Well, and the big part of it is when you're that tall, you're always going to have questions about, you know, the pad level and how you're going to generate power with that kind of frame. So that's long been a discussion point in the National Football League with big tackles. I'm going to touch on Tevin Jenkins again for both you and Jim. Jim, sounds like he's got a lot of nasty to him. And I always kind of gravitate to those types of players at certain positions in the NFL because they become, in the long term, maybe your alpha, the guy that's going to say, hey, come follow me. And that could be the center, could be the guard, could be the tackle. But, is there something like that in your opinions that is needed on the Bears offensive line right now? We got a great selection of interior players, but do you need a mentality that says, hey, I'm not taking anybody's, you know what?
Yeah.
And I'm going to take care of business here on the offensive line. It sounds like this guy might be that type of player.
Yeah, at Oklahoma State, he does. He plays with a lot of attitude. And, I think, you don't have to be a big talker. I think you talk with your play. And I think that's what Tevin Jenkins does. I think that's what, say, a prototypical tackle and probably the best tackle in football, Trent Williams, does. When he talks, it's like E.F. Hunting. People listen. He talks very rarely, but people listen. He just lets people know, yeah, I'm the guy that really is the best in the National Football League, and my standard is the standard. And I think Jenkins does offer that type of, mauling attitude where he's respected just due to his tough play. And he really doesn't have to tell anybody about it. He just shows you week in and week out.
One thing about Tevin Jenkins, too, is when he comes, because of the measurables, he doesn't have great length. He doesn't, have that ideal pass the eye test for a tackle. Can he move? Yeah, he can move in the guard. He's got everything. He's super physical. He finishes blocks really well. But again, I want a guy that's coming here knowing that he is going to be a career offensive tackle. And if that's what, the brass and with any team that it feels they're going to pick them, if they believe that they're bringing in this 10-year tackle, then great. Again, I love the way he plays. I love his nastiness. He's a big, beefy guy. But again, I want a guy that when he lines up first day of OTAs or training camp, that he's in that position to stay and play.
There's another guy, Jim, with 36 reps and another sub 540. Not that matters.
Yeah.
I know that doesn't matter, but now he opted out in November. So he said, hey,
Right.
I'm going to get ready for the draft. So a number of these guys we're talking about, in the end, for this particular situation with a pandemic, these guys built their bodies and they got trained a lot earlier than they normally would. Do you think that's going to pay dividends, or are these numbers just maybe because we're not at the combine and everything is the same? Are they going to be a little bit better than what they really are?
Yeah, no, it's a good point because, they've certainly been training for all these things for their pro day and their numbers could be inflated. But for some guys that opted out, this has actually been good for them because like here, we were just talking about Spencer Brown from Northern Iowa. I mentioned all he's been doing is working with former NFL offensive line coach Paul Alexander the entire time. So he's actually been getting good coaching, what a lot of these guys have been doing. And it's true for all these guys, no matter what facility they're at. They all go to these performance centers and they bring in an offensive line coach formerly of the NFL or currently in terms of the preps and things that they do to show these players the techniques that they're going to be asked to do at the next level. So I do think they're getting coached up from that standpoint. So they're all going to benefit. And I think for these guys, they're going to be big, strong. And as you said, a lot of these guys can move because they've trained that way here this entire offseason and through the pandemic.
All right, Jim, we got to take our break as we rumble through Bears All Access tonight here on Chicago Sports Radio 670 Score. Let's take a break. Be back in a few. This segment of Bears All Access is brought to you by Athletico Physical Therapy. Visit athletico.com to request an appointment in clinic or virtually and start feeling better tomorrow. Jeff Joniak along with Tom Thayer and Jim Miller, the former Chicago Bears quarterback from SiriusXM NFL Radio. Our guest this week, we're going over a bunch of different aspects of the draft with just 3 weeks to go. We focused on tackles. Now we're going to go back to Jim's bailiwick. We got to do it every show. We got to talk quarterbacks. And so with the trade by San Francisco, am I to believe all the national experts that are analyzing this, that the 49ers making this move to draft Mac Jones? Is this what you're hearing?
That's what everybody assumes. I'm not so sure of that, because when you look at, and I think he checks all the boxes and all those things, and I think he could play right away. But it sounds like they want to keep Jimmy Garoppolo. They want to keep Jimmy Garoppolo. They've been throwing him out there for a first-round pick. Nobody's going to give a first-round pick for Jimmy Garoppolo. So everybody assumes it's Mac Jones. I personally think it would be Justin Fields. I think he's more athletic. I think he's got a higher ceiling than Mac Jones from that standpoint, and he offers more athleticism. Again, when you look at Kyle Shanahan, he's coached both sides. He's coached the pocket passer and Matt Ryan, which really, when you look at Mac Jones, that's what he is. But he typically likes the more athletic guys, even going back to his dad drafting John Elway. You look when they drafted Robert Griffin, when Kyle was the offensive coordinator in Washington. Now, when you go back to Jay Cutler, they drafted him in Denver. So I think they would prefer, in my opinion, Justin Fields at number 3 is how I potentially see it playing out, which, it wouldn't shock anybody if that happens, because Justin, to me, has a higher ceiling than Mac Jones.
One thing about the quarterback position is Mac Jones is more similar to Jimmy Garoppolo. Justin Fields doesn't have a lot of similarities to Garoppolo. And so Justin Fields can do everything what Garoppolo and Mac Jones can do, but Mac Jones can't do everything Justin Fields can do in terms of athleticism, running the edge, the RPOs. And it's going to be interesting to see what type of offense do they want to continue to build in San Francisco, because it's two different offenses with Justin Fields than it is with Mac Jones and Jimmy Garoppolo. So I think it'll tell you a little bit about the future of the offense going forward, depending upon if they have their sights set on Mac Jones and that's who they're going with. It's going to be a drop back style, pocket protection, get the ball out of your hands type of offense. And you may not have that edge threat that you would have in an RPO offense with Justin Fields.
Jim, we can see as many as 5. That's kind of the expected number for first-round quarterbacks. Out of those 5, is there a chance one of them is going to drop further than people might think? And I'm looking at maybe Fields or Lance. Or are there any other, in your opinion, potential first-round quarterbacks that could sneak in here?
Yeah, I think, you look at Tampa. Typically, teams will trade back into the end of the first round and pick a quarterback because you get the 5th-year option. And I would think at 32, where Tampa Bay is selecting, it wouldn't shock me if they take Kyle Trask or the quarterback or Mills out there at Stanford. It really wouldn't shock me at all, because to me, they're really two prototypical drop-back passers that could learn and under Tom Brady over the next couple of years. And to me, that makes a lot of sense. As for your first question about quarterbacks dropping through, it may happen, but I do think there are teams that are going to be needy. Already, when you look at Denver, they've mentioned they want to bring in competition for Drew Lock. So whether it's Trey Lance, who isn't ready to play right now, he could go in there and compete and at least put Drew Lock on notice, and where Denver is selecting at the number 9 spot. I'm not so sure about Carolina taking a quarterback at 8. They tried to say it's off the table, but to me, for them to trade for Sam Darnold, they're basically going to get Sam Darnold for 3 years. Let's say he plays this year, he plays under his 5th-year option, which is about $18 million, and then they franchise tag him. They basically have him for 3 years and $17 million. And by them trading for him, I think it tells you that it takes them out of the quarterback market, because those other quarterbacks would have to sit behind him and learn, which wouldn't be a bad thing. But I think all in all, I think Carolina isn't going to be taking a quarterback at 8 now.
And Tom, there is an expectation that the Bears would draft a quarterback at some point in this 2021 selection process. But Jim and Tom, do you want to be sure you're not just taking one to take one?
No, I think the Bears are in a position they have to take a quarterback and they have to think about further development. And it's no offense against Tyler Bray, who's been around the NFL now for about 8 years. I don't think there was ever thought that he was going to develop into a competitor, a guy that you're going to bring to training camp and could be the dark horse in the race at the quarterback position and eventually morph into a possible starter. So I would want to see a guy. I'm not going to waste any draft choice. I'm not going to bring a guy in here just to fill a quarterback jersey in the throw balls, in 7-on-7 one-on-ones and all the drills you go through. I want a guy here that's going to get the equal consideration about development for the future that any quarterback that's already on the roster. So I don't think, Jeff, the Bears have the luxury of drafting a project, drafting a guy that, has such a muddled college career, whether through injuries or whatever the circumstances are, that you hope he's got an upside. No, I want a guy that's showing me the climb up the ladder through his college career that's ready to take that next step.
Yeah, and I think for them, the Bears don't have the assets to trade up to get one of these quarterbacks. So it's going to have to be later in the draft. And I agree with Tom. Why draft a project? How about a guy who's a 4-year starter like a Kellen Mond from Texas A&M that pretty much does everything that the Bears offense is asking him to do? I think Ian Book from Notre Dame potentially could be a consideration from the Bears. These guys aren't projects. They played quite a bit, and there are guys that could come in and compete, and a guy that you can develop, but they come with a ton of college experience.
Is there a diamond in the rough, in your opinions, a guy like, so much conversation was about Russell Wilson, that you could find and really surprise people?
I think he's not going to play right away, but I mentioned the Stanford product, Dave Mills, or Davis Mills, excuse me. This dude can throw a football now. I mean, he's just got, he doesn't have a lot of starts, which, of course, that's going to shy away a lot of teams, much like, say, Trey Lance, who only comes with 19 starts. So I think you got to be careful there. But if you run a run play action offense, say, like Arthur Smith that just got the head coaching job in Atlanta, to me, this guy would be the perfect guy to draft in the mid rounds to place behind Matt Ryan and just let him marinate a little bit. This guy is flawless throwing the football. I watched a lot of tape on him. Just comes with had a little bit of an injury history and really just hasn't played a lot. So, but he's a guy that you can really develop, and I think will become a starter at some point in his NFL career.
All right, Jim and Tom, one more break to go and another segment to wrap things up here tonight on Bears All Access here on Chicago Sports Radio 670 The Score. Fresh cut, fresh perspective. Book an appointment with Chicago Bears Small Business All-Pros winner Principal Barbers. Visit principalbarbers.com. Welcome back to Bears All Access here on Chicago Sports Radio 670 The Score. Our producer today, Jordan Tretta, with Tom Thayer and Jim Miller. I'm Jeff Joniak. Let's talk about the news of the week. Right after our show a week ago on Thursday, they had the news conferences with Matt Nagy and also General Manager Ryan Pace. And with the news, Jim Miller, that there's going to be the play calling back to Matt Nagy here for 2021. What'd you think?
Well, I think from that standpoint, I don't think it surprises anybody. I think a lot of NFL coaches, Mike McCarthy, he's taken back play calling duties. Andy Reid has done it at certain times in his career. And this is a passion of Matt Nagy. I think we've talked about it when he arrived with the Bears. He wanted to continue the play calling. But what's interesting here is that the Bears made that transition to Bill Lazor last year, and they did show some improvement. And now you've got Bill Lazor, who's got a background with Andy Dalton and probably has a certain level of comfortability. You thought it would be moving towards that Bill Lazor would be calling the plays this year. But, hey, I get it. I think the pressure cooker of the NFL is lighting up a little bit for the Bears. I think they know they want to have a lot of success. And I think Matt Nagy, from his standpoint, he wants to have a lot of control from that standpoint and how the season plays out. So he gets great joy in terms of his play calling, and so he'll resume that. It's just how quickly he'll develop that relationship with Andy Dalton, and luckily he's got good insight from Bill Lazor that he can lean on. But most coaches who are play callers before, they normally take it back, and I think that's why Nagy is elected to do it as well.
Yeah, I like this decision all around. I like that Matt Nagy is going to be the play caller. I like the kind of the pressure that it puts in the entire offense because they know the head coach is the designer of the offense and he's the guy that's calling the plays. And then when they do come off the field, Bill Lazor can be an immediate attachment to Andy Dalton, Nick Foles, who never is playing quarterback. So Matt doesn't have to transfer a lot of energy from calling plays to go and address the quarterback, what's needed from the last series, or how to look at the tape that they have on the sideline to get things corrected. So I like that Matt's calling plays. I have nothing against Coach Lazor. I like the way that he was calling plays last year. However, when you look at the pressure cooker in which the Bears is this year, I think the head coach calling the plays is better for the entirety of the team.
All right, let's look at the defense. And we got, obviously Akeem Hicks is going to be back inside. You got Khalil Mack, and those two guys are game wreckers. Tom, let's start with you on where their games could evolve, especially with some new pieces coming on the defensive side of the ball. Certainly at cornerback, we still don't know about the other safety spot.
Well, talking specifically about Khalil and Akeem, I don't want their games to get stagnant at this stage of their career. It seems like you go and you get into your 5, 6 years of your career, and now you got to continue to still develop new tricks, new moves. You remember the nighttime practice that the Bears had last year, a couple years ago?
Yeah.
And I was watching Khalil Mack in practice, and Bruce Smith, the Hall of Famer that played for the Buffalo Bills, he used to have this inside spin move that was almost unstoppable. He would set you up and he would bait you into it. In every game, he would set you up and he would get a sack from it. I saw Khalil use that move a couple times in that nighttime practice. And I've even went up and asked him, hey, why don't you show that a little bit more in the game? Because it puts a lot of paranoia into offensive tackles. So when you look at Khalil, yeah, we see what he can do